Hello there. So we are going to take a look at something quite complex. It doesn't matter what framework or what you're working with. This is complex, and that's caching and handling lazy loading relational data. But it's really cool when you get it right, and if your code or your concepts in your code doesn't get so complex. And this is something Cerebral handles very well. So let me just go through this starting point. What we have here is a table with some projects. And these projects were loaded, as we can see in the debugger. We had an app mounted signal, and that runs an action called set loading projects. And what that does is just set is loading projects to true. And as we will see later, that will make the opacity of the table like 0.5, making it a bit transparent. Um, and then we see it triggers an action called get projects, which is asynchronous. And then it runs merge projects, which will merge in some projects from the server into a projects map. We can actually click this now and take a quick look. As you can see, it uses something called Cerebral ref, and each of these projects has an author ID, an ID, and a name, which we also see in the table here. We have the ID, the name, and the author ID currently. After it has merged, it toggles this is loading project state back to false, and then it runs a new action which actually sets the projects into the table. That's a state called project rows. I just want to quickly show you the projects, and we have a query called page. So when we query the page 0, it will just automatically create 10 projects using like page 0. And if we say page 1, it will create 10 new rows going from 10 and up. We also have users, and this will take IDs. So we're going to pass the IDs from the author ID property of a project and pass that to the server, and it will just produce an array returning a name and the ID actually passed in on the request. So this is just to give us a sandbox to play around with. Okay, just to show you how this the functionality now. If I hit next, you see it becomes transparent, and it does a request to the server and loads up some new projects. So again, we see a new type of signal trigger called page changed. And this changed the page inside the Cerebral to 1. And when we now run our set loading projects, get project, merge projects, it's based on the page being 1. And so we get some different projects from the server. But basically the same thing happens. So let us take a quick look at our main file. And here we can see our two signals, app mounted and page changed. Now these are very similar, and you might argue about dry code here, but the thing is that we are actually reusing all our code. All these actions here are reused down here. The thing is that these are two different signals. So the thing is that it's a lot better to like for your sanity, to understand how the signal actually runs, to just reuse the functions. If we would, for example, point to like a different signal here, you would have to dive into some more code, and you would have to do a lot more in your head to compose how these signals run. So we do have dry code in the sense that we reuse our actions, but each signal has its set of actions to run. Okay, so let's move on to what should we check out now? Maybe we should just check out these actions. So set loading projects just sets its loading projects to true. Then we have get projects, which returns a promise, making it asynchronous, and it does a request to projects, passing the current page inside the Cerebral. It gets the rows back and resolves them. And this moves us over to merge projects, which gets the projects and converts the array into a projects map. And what's kind of special about this is that for every project in the array, we create a Cerebral reference, and we actually pass in the ID of the project. And this will link the Cerebral reference with the ID. So you can use either to look up the other one, which is very, very handy, which we will see a bit later. Then we just attach the project using the ref to the projects map. And as we can see, we grab all the references because that is what we want to return from these projects, this merge projects action. We merge the projects map into the existing projects, and we set the isLoading project state to false. So as I said, we return the references because when we look at set project rows, it will just set those references, that array of references, as project rows. And what this does is trigger a mapping function, which you have probably seen in the previous video. So our project rows is an array, as we can see here. Initial state is an array, but it has a lookup state to projects and users. And when any of these change, currently users doesn't matter because we have not implemented it yet, but we are going to. So let's say when projects change or the array inside here changes, it will run this get method. And what it does is just use the ref in project rows and look up the state on projects using that ref. And that will return the actual project. Okay, so we're going to look at two different things, caching and relational state. So first, what we can see here is that when I jump back and forth, it always loads up the projects. And it doesn't really have to do that because we can cache, like we have to cache, we can cache data, but we have to cache it based on something. And what we can base it on is that we're actually passing a page, a specific page to the server. So if we use the page as the key, and we don't have to cache the result from the server. We can just cache the references we want to display. So instead of talking in theory, let's get to some practical stuff. So first of all, let us go to get projects. And I already have imported a cache here. So what we want to do, first of all, is to check if we actually have some cached results. So let's call that cached results. And let us point to cache and get. And what we want to get is the key of the cache. And as I said, the key will be the page we pass on the query to the server. And that key is available on the state called page. Like that. And if we have some cached results, we are going to resolve this. But now we have to pass some more information because the next action needs to know if the rows it is getting is a cached row, which means it will only have the references, or if it's not a cached row, which means it will have the result from the server. So we'll say that this is cached and the rows will be the cached results, meaning it will be the array of references it will use to display the current projects. Okay, and if we do not have any cache results, we will move the request inside there. Let's make this a bit nicer. Oops, like so. And we also have to change this to cache is false, and the rows are still the same rows. Okay, so now we have prepared our get projects to use the cache. Now we need to move into merge projects, and this will not get the projects, but let's just call it a result. And now the references we're going to return here can originate from two different places, either directly from the result or, as it does here, from the projects that we download from the server. So let us create just a refs variable there, and then we check if the result is cached. And if it is cached, the references are just rows on the result. And we do not really have to do anything more than that. If it's not cached, we have to do all this logic down here. Let's make this a bit nicer too, like that. Okay, let's move that there, and we can't point to projects, but result.rows instead. Let's format it a bit. Okay, so now when we get the result, we prepare a refs variable. If the result is cached, the refs will be the rows passed from the cache on the previous action, or else we are going to reduce over the rows from the server and create a map instead, like I explained earlier. Okay, so we should be ready now if I save this. And since we did changes in our code now, Cerebral just says, okay, I need to refresh now. I can't merge the previous state with the new one. So let's just say that's okay. And now we did get our initial projects, and I hit next, and you see it loads up. But if I go to the previous one, it's still okay. I did something wrong. Let's check, what did I do wrong? Yeah, get projects, cache. Oh, sorry. We have to make sure that when we actually do get a result from the server, we have to put it inside the cache. So what we have to make sure of here is that when we have the new references, as stated here, on the downloaded project, we have to set those in the cache. And we do that by pointing to the page and insert the refs. Okay, so if we do not have a cached result, we make sure that we actually cache the new result. That is an important part of caching. Okay, let's try this again. Let's just reset everything and do a refresh here. Okay, so now you saw it loaded up the projects, and if I hit next, it still needs to load up the projects, but if I go to the previous one, it didn't have to load at all. And if I'm going back, it didn't have to load, but if I'm continuing, it does have to load. So now you see how incredibly easy it was to introduce caching into our project. Okay, but this was not everything. We also want to go to the server whenever we meet some users. So when there's a user that's not available inside the Cerebral, we want to go to the server, grab the user, put it into the Cerebral so that we can display the name of the author instead of the ID. And this is actually this is really hard to do, like generally. But I think Cerebral handles this in a very good way, and we're going to take a look at how exactly we're going to do that now. Okay, so let's move into our code and let's take a look at our merge projects file. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we need some place to identify where do we identify when there's a missing user. And this is a really good place to do it, because here we are going through the projects from the new projects from the server, and then we can easily identify if any of these new projects has any users that we don't already have. So we need to collect the IDs of these users. So first, let's start up by defining a missing users array. And as we go through our projects, we need to be able to reference our users, get users, like that. So whenever we prepare a new project, we will also check if we can grab a user. And the way we do that is point to our users, but we're not going to use the project author ID directly. We're actually going to point to ref and pass the project author ID. And the reason we do this is because when we grab the users, they will get a Cerebral reference. That is because of optimistic updates and stuff like that, because Cerebral keeps track with their own references, but we can link an ID to a reference. That is exactly what we're doing on this line. And we will do the same with the users. So when we do this instead, author. When we do this instead, we will get the reference back, which we can use to look up the user. What we could do here instead, which is a little bit easier, is just say author ref, and we can just check if we actually get the reference back. We don't have to actually look into the user's map, thinking about it. Okay, so let's do this instead. So if we do not have an author reference, we will point to our missing users array and push in the project author ID. Okay, just to backtrack that, when we load up a new project from the server, we create and link the a reference to the ID of the project. Then we check if there is a link between the author ID of the project and a reference inside our Cerebral. If that's not the case, which means, okay, this user does not exist, we push the author ID of the user into our missing users array. Okay, so now we have tracked what missing users we have, and we have to pass this to the next action. So the result here has to be a little bit different. Refs is still refs, but we also say missing users. Missing users. Okay, let me save that, and let's move to set project rows, which will not get the refs directly, but it will be on result, and it needs to return result missing users. Okay, and now you see kind of like we are passing like properties along the action chain, much like we do with React, and properties down to other components. So this is kind of a familiar concept. But let me save this now, and when we refresh now, everything should still work as expected. Okay, that's good. We still have our caching in place and downloading projects. Okay, so what we want to do now is to introduce a couple of new actions, and they will be very similar to getting projects and merging projects, but they will be called get users, and this is an action called get users. And we will also introduce merge users. This is an action, merge users. Okay, so these get users will be very similar, as I said, to get projects. So what I'm going to do now, just to get this quickly up and going, is to, let's see, get users. And we will not introduce a cache on this, and you will see why very shortly. Just let me clean this up. We are going to get users instead. We're going to pass the IDs, and these IDs we will get from the previous action, missing users, like that. And the users will be returned as an array, so we don't have to point to rows. We can just say, let's call it users, and we will just resolve them like that. Okay, users, this should be okay now. Let's remove the cache too. And merged users is a lot like merged projects. So we just copy that too, make it a little bit merge users. I will go through this very shortly. Just let me get the code in here. Merge users. We don't need this. We don't need any of this. And we don't need this author stuff. We will call it all users instead. all users, and this will be a user, and this will be users. Sorry if this is confusing, but it won't be very shortly. So that's the users map. Okay, and it's the users we are reducing on, and we don't need this stuff. Okay, I think we are, oops, user ID and user, of course. Okay, I think we are ready now. So let's just see how we are going to insert this, and then we'll look at actions again. So in our main file here, we're going to add the new actions. So let's insert those, get users, and merge users, and merge users. Okay, so when we have set the project roles, we are going to get users, and then we're going to merge those users. And we're going to do this also when we change the page. Okay, one thing we should consider though is there is no reason to go and get users if there aren't any missing users. So when we now go to our get user section, which returns a promise that does a request to the server, we can actually say that if there is, if there are users, missing users, we do the request to the server like that. And let's clean this up a little bit like that. And if there aren't any, we just resolve with an empty array. Okay. So we have that in place. So we get users based on the IDs here. And actually, we also have to make sure that we join these on comma, because that's what the backend requires. So we create a request to users passing an IDs parameter with a comma separated list of user IDs. That will return the users, which we pass to our merge users, which either is an empty array or it's actually some users, and we merge that into our projects. We could also do a checker if there actually are some users, but doesn't matter. Okay, so let's see now if everything is still working. We have one more thing to do, but I just want to check that everything is still working as expected. And it does. Let's see. Let's review this. Okay, it sets page 1, is loading projects to true. It merges the projects, and it set is loading to false. Then we set the project rows. We get the users. We merge the users. We merge them into projects. That's not correct. Let's see. Merge users. That should of course be into users. Okay, now let's see. Let's reset to make sure that everything is okay. Okay, now it merges into users. We have the ID and everything. Okay, that's great. So what we want to do now is we want to display like the username instead of the ID. And the way we do this is go into our Cerebral, and let's clean this up. And we have to change the output of this state. So what we're going to do is change this to being a variable called project. And we are going to run a to.js method. So everything from the Cerebral is immutable and have this to.js method, it being an object or being an array. And this kind of exports the state to a plain JavaScript version of it, which you can mutate. So what we're going to insert here is project.author, and the author is a user. And what we have to remember now is that we cannot use the plain author ID because all users are saved with a Cerebral reference. So what we do is say Cerebral ref get and project author ID. Okay, so now we will get the reference, which will in turn get the user as an author. But if it does not exist, we can create a temporary object. And we will add a UI property to it called isLoading and set that to true. What this means is that we will always make sure that we have an author, it either being a user or just some object describing what is happening. And what is happening at this time is that we have no user. So we say that, okay, we are going to get that user. If there was like an error when trying to get the user, we would actually create a user with a reference and using the ID. But we will probably have like an error UI state or something. So we always have a user, and this is great for UI because we are not only able to display what we have, we also are able to display what we are going to have available to us, and even if something is wrong with that something we are trying to display. Okay, but we still have to return the project here. And let me save that. And we can move back to our app and look at where we now display this ID. Let's change this now to this new author property, and we will check if it is loading. And if it is, we just say loading. And if it is not, we can say project author dot name. Okay, let's save that. And as we can see now, we had some state and we had some users, so they instantly appeared. But we can reset this now and refresh. And now we will see that it starts with loading and then it changes to the username. And going to next, we need to load the projects and get the users. But what's really nice now is that we have this caching of projects, which is needed. But as we load these users, they will stay in this users map. So when I go to the previous page now, we use the cached projects, and that is a cache for the project row state, not the projects map, just as the users map will not be like deleted. So when we jump back and forth now, we do that instantly and we see both the user information and the project information. So this is really nice indeed. So what we're also going to see now is if I hit next and load up some stuff, I hit next and I load up some stuff, I can actually grab the slider and I can still just move back and forth in time. And that's kind of cool because now we have really complex logic, but we can still just traverse time without any issues. And as you can see, again, just traversing. Okay, so this is the stuff I want to show you. This is really complex state handling. We have caching in place. We are getting users as they are missing when we load different projects. And now you see how you can handle all of this using Cerebral. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.